Well, welcome everyone. My name is Peter Cook. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Council of Churches, and I wish to extend a warm welcome to all of you who are with us for an open conversation about long and short-term responses in wake of the terrible shooting which took place in Buffalo. We continue to pray for the victims of this tragedy, both known and unknown, and promise that their struggles will not be forgotten. We know that there are tragedies and events in our country, like, for instance, the terrible tragedy in Uvalde, which also deserve our attention. Indeed, these mass shootings across our country are not just one-off events which are forgotten in the next news cycle. They are very interrelated and remind us of the need to work together to address underlying problems which deserve our attention. In this spirit, we do, however, want to discuss the particulars for Buffalo, to name the complex problems and struggles and discern how we can cross old divisions to chart a path to a brighter future. Today, our task will not be to take over the good work that is being done by many, but to hear about the work that is underway and identify ways we can collaborate and not duplicate efforts going forward. We've invited some people to speak to several topics as a way to begin a conversation with all of you. So we will do our best to allow space for comments from this extensive audience. We ask that speakers keep their remarks to about 5 to 7 minutes apiece, so we have room for responses from all of you, which will come at the second half of each 30-minute block. We also ask that you place your questions and comments in the chat or use the raise your hand function. But to please make your questions and comments brief so we can hear from as many people as possible. We have about 200 people registered on this call. So, we're not probably going to get to everyone, but we're going to do our best. Please be aware that we are recording this event so others can see it who are not able to participate today. And we also want to recognize that while doing this conversation on Zoom is helpful in allowing more people to participate in Western New York and across the state, this will not be a substitute for subsequent meetings in person where we listen carefully to those who live in East Buffalo, who struggle to be heard, or who find meeting virtually to be a challenge. So thank you for being with us today. We're so grateful that you can be here with us. And let's begin with our first speakers. Our first segment is going to focus on interpersonal and structural racism and the status of gun violence legislation. And I'd first like to introduce our panelists. Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie is the interim president and general secretary of the National Council of Churches. She is also a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And we're so grateful to her today for being with us. And also the Reverend Julian Cook, who is the pastor at Macedonia Baptist Church, who brought together a fairly robust interfaith service the day after this tragedy took place at Macedonia. So Bishop Murphy McKenzie, why don't you begin first?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, and good morning to everyone. I'm happy to be able to see many faces that I had an opportunity to worship with, pray with, and be with in Buffalo in the aftermath of the shootings. My family, I have family in the Buffalo area and had an opportunity to reconnect and connect. I want to thank my colleagues in the Unity and Diversity Movement of the National Council of Churches, representing 38 denominations, and the New York Council of Churches, especially Peter Cook, for engaging not only in the ministry of presence, but in the ministry of action in the aftermath of this tragedy and trauma in Buffalo and beyond, with the two-edged sword of advocacy and activism, prayer and proclamation. I want to thank the courageous people of Buffalo who insist on living in a world that often does not appreciate them. You and I are created in the image of God, and that an atrocity against one is an affront to God. There is an African-American spiritual that asks 4 questions to be exact. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when you pierced him in the side? Or were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? And sometimes it causes me to tremble. And things that are happening in our country are causing us to tremble. A series of questions were not meant to be taken literally. The questions were meant to challenge the listener to remember. And every time a fresh wound is created by acts in Buffalo or another Buffalo, and this time in Alabama last night, we remember. But the kind of remembering that the song is calling for is a kind that allows the past to reemerge with a fresh impact upon the present. It is like a form of anamnesis, a Greek word that caused the community of listeners to make what happened in the past a part of their present story. The past is a part of our present story. In the past, it was a lynching tree, and the present story is media lynching. In the past, it was a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and the present story are continuous, senseless acts of violence where no one is safe and no one is exempt. From Ferguson to Buffalo, from Parkland to Uvalde, from Emmanuel AME Church to a Taiwanese church, from a synagogue to a mosque. In the past, it was the tyranny of separate but equal, but the present story is a Congress refusing to enact common sense law, gun legislation, limiting federal court powers to monitor school desegregation and banning claims of institutional discrimination. In the past, it was overt racism, and the present story is that people have been given permission to unleash violence, racist acts and activities that are disguised as patriotism. The former president of Chicago Theological Seminary, Stephen Ray, is quoted in a recent article commenting on political scientist Ray Burge's observation in his book, The Nuns, noting that such lone shooters like in Buffalo and Emmanuel AME shooter are enabled by structures of permission. And structures of permission occurs when prominent figures in American society give voice to ideas and sentiments such as "they will not replace us." White supremacist loners are authorized to behave as they do. Know that in the past few years, political leaders at the very top, whether it's local, state, or federal, political leaders have given permission to shoot them, target them, whoever doesn't agree with them, and intimidate them personally and publicly. He quotes, "I believe that one of these structures of permission was provided by Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley during the Supreme Court confirmation hearing of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Cruz and Hawley did not treat her as someone created in the image of God, nor did they treat her as an American citizen. And mean-spiritedness treated her less than a human and did so in the presence of her parents and her children, and of course, the public. The hymn is recalling the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and do this in remembrance of me that Luke and Paul speak of in the New Testament. It is a call to go from passive listening to active engagement. Therefore, the song itself is your call to remember the past and serve to make it right in the present story. So the question now comes, how do we make it right in the present story? With the National Council of Churches Act Now campaign that started in the mid-1970s, It says, and we repeat again today, that we must challenge ourselves and our communities to engage in truth-telling that lead to actions that right the wrongs. We have to confront racism wherever it is found, in our homes, in ourselves, in our communities and institutions, and make a resolve to stand against injustice. We must call, write, email, and collaborate with each other and other organizations that are present on the call or in the community. We have to settle the issue or not get caught up in the issue of who gets credit, but collaborate in ways that magnify your voice to bring about the changes necessary for a thriving Buffalo for everyone. Ask, demand, get a seat at the table of decisions before the plan is developed, the resources located and signed on. We are often invited to the table at the end, not at the beginning, only to find out that the benefits are going somewhere else. We have a variety of resources that are a part of the End Racism on our website at the National Council of Churches. We have a mental health toolkit that can be used in your community and other communities, a suicide toolkit. We are happy to hear that there is a coalition of senators who are willing to push forward some form of gun reform. It is not the best, it is not all that we're looking for, but there are some gains in there. One is major investments to increase access to mental health and suicide prevention program, but every violent person does not necessarily have a violent tendency. Closing the so-called boyfriend loop has been brought back into the legislation that was taken out of the Violence Against Women Act, and enhanced review process for buyers under 21, and giving some teeth to having some red flag laws that are enacted locally in the state level and as the local level. Getting out of the hands of those between 18 and 21-year-olds, AK assault rifles process, when weapons of warfare do not necessarily need to be in the hands of persons on the street. It needs to be in the hands of the military, because assault rifles and assault type weapons only purpose is to kill as many people as quickly as possible. The legislation that is being pushed now is clarifying the definition of a federally licensed firearm dealer and how firearms ownership passes down from one person to another. And it's beginning to take a look at school security resources, but they have left out expanded background checks. Those are the things that the update upon that particular legislation. It offers some, but not all, that we're looking for. Thank you, Peter, for bringing us together. And we hope that we said something that would be encouraging, or said something that will help motivate our collaboration.
Great. Thank you, Bishop McKenzie, for your comments. I think that we are going to extend this to 11:40 because we did have a couple technical glitches. And we will be editing this this recording so that it doesn't have the glitches in it. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Cook.
Thank you so much, Reverend Peter, and to all those who are assembled. Thank you, Bishop McKenzie, for such a profound summary of why we are here in a call to action as we think through the important moments that, and this important moment, that the atrocity in Buffalo has invited us to, strangely invited us to. So I'll be very brief in some of the work that I've been involved in. I see several of my colleagues who will also be able to give extensive reports on some of their efforts and some of the things that we've actually been able to work on together. One of the first things that we did on May 15th, immediately after the Tops massacre, was to, first of all, let's start with May 14th. that evening, going and supporting families at an area unit that had been set up for families to come and find out whether the person who they might have thought, their family member who they thought was in the top store was still alive or had been killed. And so clergy were called upon. Pastor Denise Walden Glenn, who I know is on the call, was there. Pastor Corey Gibson and also JJ Sullivan and myself went to really provide support for families. And out of that moment grew a desire to call upon our broader community, the interfaith community, to a space of grief and lament, to acknowledge that something awful had happened, that a white supremacist terrorist attack had happened in the city of Buffalo. And we needed to call ourselves to acknowledge the way in which sacred humanity had been defiled in that moment, the way our community had been assaulted. And so we met at Macedonia Baptist Church, where I serve as pastor, and we had a true interfaith service that involved folks from a number of traditions praying and offering leadership in their tradition. And we were visited by several community leaders. There were political officials present, but we largely tried to keep that moment about grief and lament communally. Macedonia Church, which I want to highlight, is located just about a half a mile from the Tops location. So when you think of churches in the area, it is one of the closest Black churches to the Tops market. And Macedonia, as a result of that, really has been serving as a hub for organizing activities. For the last 2 weeks, some top survivors have been meeting with organizers at Macedonia to really talk about what their experience has been, the areas that they need support, how the community can come alongside them, because we know that there are top survivors who were working that day, and then there were those who happened to be shopping that day. And many in either one of those respective categories, many feel that their voices have not been heard. And quite frankly, many are not yet ready to return to everyday life as they knew it prior to. So we're just seeing many of them begin to come back out, to come to the meetings. Each meeting for those trauma conversations, there's been a new group of folks added to that group. And so it's very, very important that we talk about that. And there are several survivors who really feel that they have not even been supported by the Tops Corporation or other entities in the ways in which they should. So those are important things. I think another piece is media-wise, we've been trying to deal with the reality that America has a violence problem. And so because America has a violence problem, there is news of another shooting, it seems, every other day. And in some ways, that means that the Buffalo massacre has often been overshadowed in some ways. And so that's one of the things that we've been trying to do, is really think about how we continue to link the atrocity in Buffalo, the massacre in Buffalo, with what has happened throughout the rest of the country. And one of the important things to acknowledge, that while each of these atrocities does have their significant differences, is that there is something that connects them all. And that is that the AR-15 is the weapon of choice for white supremacist shooters. And we need to be able to talk about that and the connection to Uvalde and other atrocities, Mother Emanuel, and unfortunately we can go on and on with the connections there. Of course, the massacre in Buffalo has brought lots of attention to the area, media attention, but also various types of supports, whether it be food supports, mental and emotional health supports, and those are all good things. But one of the challenges that we've been experiencing is how to really frame these sustainably, how to make sure that in 6 months, 3 months, a year from now, as people continue to emerge from their homes, as people continue to present various types of challenges in direct correlation to this massacre, that we are able to support them. And so sustainability has become the key word in many of the activities that we see going on here. White supremacy was certainly manifested on May 14th, but the reality is that white supremacy was alive and well long before that. We had in Buffalo, we had a structured food apartheid that was permitted, as Bishop McKenzie talked about, but it was permitted, but also empowered through structures and big box stores that have made decisions, very clear decisions, to neglect the east side of the city. And just to frame Buffalo, because I know many of you may not have a context for how deep the issues of poverty and racialized poverty run in this community, I want to present you with just a few statistics to keep in mind. And I'm aware that Dr. Henry Taylor will be on later to talk a bit more about this. But 77% of Buffalo Public School students receive free and reduced lunch. So that's very important as you're thinking about poverty here. Students of color comprise about 86% of those who attend Buffalo Public Schools. 30% of Buffalo residents live at the poverty margins. The median income in the city of Buffalo is $39,000. Childhood poverty stands at 43.4% in the city of Buffalo, making the city of Buffalo the second highest poverty, have the second highest poverty rate among children in the nation. And Buffalo also has some of the oldest housing stock in the nation, which means that we lead in the nation in lead poisoning among children. 35% of Buffalo's Black residents live at the poverty level. So again, racialized poverty. 42% of Buffalo's Latinx residents live at the poverty margins, and 49% of Asian Americans in Buffalo live at the poverty margins. So that's just to present a picture there. Reverend William Barber often says that the shooter has been apprehended, Peyton Gendron has been apprehended in this case, but the killer is still on the loose. And we will need a sustainable approach in order to be able to address that. We in Buffalo, we've heard a lot of, and as I close, we've heard a lot of terminology and conversation about strength. We can push past this because we are strong. I want to caution against a lot of what we're hearing on that. We've even come up with a term, some of us have heard it passed around quite extensively lately, Buffalo strong. But I'd like to emphasize that the truest test of our moral strength is not found in our ability to forget, as Bishop McKenzie talked about, but the truest test of our moral fortitude and imagination may in fact be found in our ability to remember, to sit with this, to come up with sustainable solutions to this, and to do the work that our souls so desperately need. Thank you so much, and thank you for your participation, and I thank you, Reverend Cook, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Reverend Cook, for that eloquent set of words, and also to Bishop McKenzie. I'm going to suggest, since I don't see any questions in the chat yet, that we move to our next segment, and then we will try to work some questions in at around 10:50 or so, and then we will go to the final segment. So the next set of people that I'd like to introduce to you is Reverend Denise Walden Glenn, Ms. Sigourney Cook, and also the Reverend John Sullivan. Denise is the executive servant leader for Voice Buffalo. Reverend Sullivan is the chair for Voice Buffalo, and Sigourney Cook is the executive director for the King Urban Life Center. And so in this segment, we would like to talk a little bit about what victims are struggling with and what kinds of responses are underway. So Reverend Denise, why don't you go ahead?
Blessings, 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 everybody. It is great to be on the call with you. It is also to Bishop Vashai's comment, nice to see people that have prayed with us and been with us during this time. And so to speak to what folks are struggling with on the ground, for those of you who don't know, Voice Buffalo is an interfaith restorative racial justice and equity organization where we do leadership development and we organize. So we've spent a lot of time with grassroots organizations and deeply in community at this time, just listening and being a presence and serving our community. I heard Pastor Cook talk about individuals who were at TOPS at the time of the shooting, some of which were still, I just got phone calls yesterday from folks who have not been out of their house or spoken to anyone to let them know that they had been in that store. That is how much trauma that they are holding. Still getting phone calls from parents about just how their children are wrestling with being in school or even the ability to go to school or the fear of them working. As you all know, we are on the eve of our Juneteenth festival, and my phone has not stopped ringing with concerns for our community as we go out to celebrate at Juneteenth on tomorrow. Voice also is very influential in our GOTV efforts, and we launched Souls to the Polls. We've been doing it for the last few years, and our Souls to the Polls event is also scheduled for tomorrow, and we've gotten lots of concern about that. I want to echo Reverend Pastor Cook, because a lot of times we hear this word resilience when it comes to Black people. And although, yes, I think that we are a beautiful, amazing, and resilient people, we are in a time where we are hurting and we are grieving and we are dealing with layers and layers and layers of trauma, especially considering we are also coming out of the COVID pandemic. And people experience lots of loss during that time. So we are experiencing trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. As a community leader and a clergy person who has been walking very closely with the 13 families that were most impacted by this tragedy and this massacre, the hearings have started, and that in itself is another trauma. I am not on here today just to highlight for you all the pain and the issues that are still happening, but also wanting to share with folks some good things that are happening in some ways of collaboration or support. Buffalo has put out a call for culturally competent and sensitive mental health services, including non-traditional mental health services. What I mean by that is things like art therapy, music therapy, movement therapy. That call has been put out and some have answered. And that is going to be a call that is going to continue to be out for a while, as there are so many people that are in need of mental health services and not necessarily receiving those services. And not because Buffalo does not have those types of mental health professionals, but because, again, those folks are spread thin. There's also been a call for a faith presence in our community, especially the 14208 zip code. And what folks have explained to me that they mean by a faith presence is they just want to see us and know that we are there and accessible to them. We've been doing a lot of that work with the Resource Center, but we've also talked about coordinating some faith walks where faith leaders are just walking neighborhoods and walking communities and being a steady presence in that community. Voice Buffalo, Pastor John Sullivan, our board chair, wanted me to put out a reminder that we are Train the Trainer certified in restorative justice and restorative practices, and have been very influential in launching peace hubs throughout our city and some throughout the county. And that's something else that we would like to offer. Peace hubs offer a community space for folks to come into, knowing that they are valued and heard. Everybody brings something to the space and needs something from the space. And it's really a way of being in community and in relationship with one another and facilitating facilitating a dialogue that allow folks to process in a real way what they are going through, but not just process what they are going through, but identify what they need to continue to get through. And so that's something that we would like to offer on this call. In addition, folks have really come together around food distribution. There is a coalition working with, and I know a lot of our churches have opened their doors for food pantries, even some who don't traditionally do that work. And there is a need to continue to get resources to the folks who are doing food distribution. So that, and when I say food distribution, and I pray that this is well received, there have been some folks that have come into our community and just kind of given out whatever. And there's been some comments and some things made that have been unkind about the gratitude that they feel there's not seen in our community. Not that there's a lack of gratitude for the food distribution, but understanding the community that you're serving and some of the medical needs in this community. And so when we're doing food distribution, there are some folks who are doing high quality food distribution where they are connecting with families and finding out the specifics about dietary concerns and needs and making sure that people are getting food that is healthy and nutritious and will meet their medical needs. And so there's a continued need for that support. There's also a continued need for prayer. And again, that spiritual presence. I know that folks have asked for at some point in the near future, there to be some show of an interfaith service that community members would like to be a part of, closer to the site on Tops. And I know that some clergy on this call have been kind of working to think about what that could look like to answer that request from the community. And so again, there are some things going well. There's definitely been an outpouring for support. I think what's most important to remember, as the media is already on to the next thing, this pain, this tragedy, this trauma, this grief has not left this community. And the truth is there are a lot of folks in this community that are holding this community that have not really taken a moment to process where they're actually at with their grief and their trauma. And I believe calls like this are important for us to continue to identify the long-term solutions and what that looks like. As many of you may know on this call, there has been an announcement about the Tops store reopening. There are mixed emotions about that in our community. And there has been a survey that has been going around, and most people really just want access to nutritious food and fear that if that is not the route the community takes, we might not get that. And so there is some much needed community work and conversation that needs to happen around what that looks like. And again, why were we a food apartheid to begin with one store, and what is the plan to ensure that our community does not go back to just having one grocery store? And I believe that those are conversations that have also started and community is hoping to have more involvement in. So I just want to thank you all. And I wanted to just kind of share with you all that, yes, although there is still a lot of hurt and a lot of grief and a lot of pain and trauma, there are a lot of those things, but we are seeing an outpouring of love in our community. We are seeing unity come together in our community like we haven't seen it before. We are seeing community ask for a deeper faith presence, which I think is incredible, and a reminder to us as Black people that our faith has always been our foundation and we need it. And it's always been the pillar of the movement before some of us were even alive, right? Including myself. And so we are grateful for that. There are some great things going on, but there are definitely layers and layers and layers of support that will be needed in the months and years to come. So thank you all for being on this call and being part of this conversation. And I will pass it to our awesome and incredible board chair, Pastor John Sullivan.
Greetings. To second everything what everyone else have said, it's a blessing to be on this call. It's encouraging to see the interest and the willingness to help. I just want to just second with the mental health, the sustainable piece is that I just want to go back to this Peace Hub circles, and I believe that is something that I believe is very important, because what it is it's offering churches to be a space within that community. As we know, when it comes to mental health, specifically with this community, with our community, is that there's mistrust between the mental health piece as well as the people who need it, especially with this ideal of trauma, right, which is not new to the Black community. But what if we can kind of reimagine how the faith community can partner up with this, is that we have seen that if churches within our communities begin to open up our homes, our churches, to invite the community within to help process that, I believe that is a needful space for many of the church leaders within the city who is asking, what can we do? So I really wanted, thank you, Reverend Denise, for doing a great job of communicating a little bit what that is, what we call it restorative circles or the peace hubs, because I believe that is something that could be sustainable, could be long-term. And also what we're seeing, and I am happy about, and some people do it as outreach for their church, as I see, which is awesome. Also, what I also see, which I believe that we have to continue to fan the flame, like what Reverend Cook mentioned earlier, that on the day of this horrific event, I received a phone call from Reverend Denise, who was overwhelmed. And also we had a rare moment. The investigators or the police, law enforcement invited clergy into the space, right? They knew that we need faith to connect to this moment. And being overwhelmed, I just picked the phone and started calling as many pastors that I could have that moment. And I'm grateful that Pastor Corey and Pastor Cook showed up, and we was able to be that arm. And we talking about sustaining mental health, we need to see more of that arm, more of that partnership, not just with law enforcement, which is amazing, but also with organizations, grassroots, specifically organizations connecting with faith leaders that could continue to walk this community through with this spiritual piece in it, as well as competent professionals. So I just want to implore our faith leaders to continue on this journey of being present and continue this walk, because I believe it's long-term healing within that, right? That trust, that comfort level. And then our goal is to kind of reimagine our houses of worship as hubs where we can help the community process this, which Reverend Denise said, and Ms. Cook is on the call, and I'm going to pass it to her because they have some unique ways of how this can be that not in a traditional way what we're used to when we think of mental health or we think of processing. So Ms. Cook, I see you, I believe.
Hi, Pastor. Yeah, hi, Pastor Sullivan. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Peter and Bishop McKenzie, Reverend Denise, and Pastor Cook for all of your work, and I'm delighted to be here with you. I just want to, as the executive director of the King Urban Life Center here on Buffalo's East Side, we reside in the 14211 zip code. I just want to say thank you to everyone who is a part of this call and who was willing to lend their support to this Buffalo community. Briefly, the King Urban Life Center is a nonprofit organization on Buffalo's East Side. We serve upwards of 250 families year-round through 3 programs that we offer that are free to families, children and their families. We have an after-school program that is the whole stretch of our school year. We serve K through 8 in the after-school program, and is STEAM focused. We also have a summer camp, 6-week summer camp serving ages K through 6. And an early childhood literacy program that supports young children and their families ages 18 months to about 5 years old. And because of all of that, those wraparound services, we want to make sure that out of this tragedy that we're able to fill in even more gaps that our children and our families have. We serve young children, we serve older children, but our focus is on children and their families. So our care, the programs that we have are already trauma informed, but we know and recognize the deep trauma that our families have, especially out of this tragedy. So we've been able to immediately gather donations, food and personal care items, self-care items, because we recognize that those are not things that people would immediately think that people are lacking in the aftermath of all this. And we want to make sure that we are focused on trauma care. So we've been able to collaborate with Catholic Charities and WIC, with the Buffalo Urban League's Project Hope, who are always pushing into our programs. And we've been able to identify a couple of culturally competent healthcare, mental health care professionals with Catholic Charities. So we've created a program immediately, I would say after the first or second week of this tragedy. We opened our doors to the community for coffee and conversations. We were able to get donation of coffee and muffins and just a space for an hour Fridays at 11 a.m. at the King Urban Life Center for families of all ages, just to come and air their grievances, talk about, past grief and trauma, but anything that they are experiencing out of this tragedy. It has been thankfully successful, but we want to make sure that we get the word out. And we recognize that in the Black community, especially, mental health is not something that our families would regularly go seek. Because of the trust factor, a lot of that mental health support usually comes through, as Pastor Denise and Pastor Cook and Pastor Sullivan have expressed, they come out of the church. But we are, we recognize the capacity needs to be greater for that kind of wraparound care. So we have been able to open our doors to people every other Friday at 11. And we had coffee and conversation, just this free conversation. Last week, Friday, we implemented the arts. We know the therapeutic nature of the arts and music, and helping people to express what they're feeling. So this was just an innovative way to, get people to open up through, across generations. So we had people coming in to color. We gave out free coloring books, and they could bring them for the next coffee and conversations, which is on June 24th at 11 a.m. Or they could keep them at home and introduce that into their daily lives. We have seen the effects of this trauma from the shooting in our children, and how they are, afraid to, enter certain spaces, enclosed spaces, also especially school buildings, and because we are right off of Best Street, where the Juneteenth is happening, that is a concern of ours too, and of our families. What does that look like? What does the safety of our families look like while we celebrate this this federal holiday? So we are trying to implement long-term support for our families and our children. And those are a few ways that we've been able to actively engage the community and make sure that they know that we're there to support them. Collaborating with Catholic Charities, Project Hope, WIC. We have connection with the Birchfield Penny Arts Center and this Buffalo Science Museum, making sure that we are not leaving any stone unturned as in a way that people can connect to expressing their grievances and their trauma. So, and I don't know if any of you heard, but the safety around cultural experiences and events has just now touched our African American Cultural Center here in Buffalo. They had to cancel their production of A Raisin in the Sun because they had an imposing figure come in to scope out the place, you know, a perpetrator. So that kind of stuff is happening more frequently. So as Pastor Lee said, trauma is it's excessive now. And we are here as a beacon of hope. We occupy a beautiful historic church building here on the east side, former St. Mary's of Sorrows, and we want to make sure our doors are open to people and they feel safe and they are enlightened, and that they have the spaces for them. We also have a community garden who we engage our volunteers from the community, from other organizations, collaboration with Grassroots Gardens, another nonprofit on the east side that helps to combat food insecurity and to expose our young children and families to planting and gardening and you know, natural resources. So those are some of the things that we're doing at the King Urban Life Center in the immediate. But I do want to thank you all for your time, and I hope that I've given you enough information. And please feel free to contact me or our staff on our website for more information. Thank you.
Great.
And we also, just one more thing, I just want we're not owning this mental health part, right? This is, and I don't know who's on the call, but this also, we need more resources, and it can be just a matter of knowing who to connect our communities to. So we're also asking anyone who's in this field, and especially like Ms. Cook, who have a different ways of reaching this population. We're asking for you guys to bring it to the light so we can have more tools, more resources to share. So I just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. So let's take 3-4 minutes here to see if there are any questions. I do know that we had one very specific question about where to send donations for food, for instance. Helen, I think you were the one who asked that question.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Garay Toppins, the Associate Secretary for the Religious Society of Friends Quakers. I wanted to know, where can we send donations for nutritious food, for mental health support? I heard that there's a gardening program. Quakers have special grants for gardening programs. Will we get a listing of the organizations with the contact information, or should I put my contact in the chat, or how do we find out?
Blessings. Thank you, Ms. Helen. So if folks who are able to support different pieces, email Aliyah, and I will throw her email in the chat. She is connecting them with the organizations who are coordinating those pieces on the ground. That's definitely one way to get connected. There is a resource sheet that community has put together that I'm happy to share with Pastor Cook so that he can share it out with this group. And that lists some of our organizations specifically and what we're focusing on if folks want to do direct outreach to those individuals, but especially for food and coordination of mental health. I'll throw Aliyah's email in the chat and she can connect you with the groups who have been leading in that work so that you can coordinate with them specifically.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Neil Berry.
How we doing? I'm in New York City. I just want to thank you guys for talking about the trauma part, because I think it's so important. We do a lot of work around trauma-informed congregations. People who want to get into this work need to be trauma-informed, especially congregations, and their use of the sacred text when they're not, capable of using the sacred text. So we do a lot of work around that, trauma-informed congregations. That's one thing that I think that we can offer. Another thing I was thinking about is the fact that we got to start pushing leadership. We need better leadership. We need quality leadership around characteristics of a Christian or of anybody in faith. but we certainly have to start looking at leadership and immediately. We just can't say to the next election, we have to put the pressure on them now. I think that's something that we can carry forth. There are some really great ideas, but really that trauma-informed, that mental health part is probably the biggest thing that, and that trust part that our communities are really necessary. In New York City, we have that problem all the way up and down. And I like the fact that you pressed on that, Reverend Denise and Mr. Sullivan. This is so important that you stress trauma when people are trying to help out certain communities because they have no clue around community, historical, or none of that. So I appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. One more question from Reverend Clark.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to offer that God has blessed me for about 37 years now to move around this country and do outreach as an outreach hip hop pastor. I'm somebody who goes all the way back to bringing the originals of hip hop, Run DMC, Salt and Pepper, Heavy D and the Boys, and everybody on stage. And I have a unique ability to communicate with our hip hop community culture and bring that and wrap that in a faith movement that God has given me. And I would love to make that accessible to Buffalo to help with the mental health issue as well as leadership issue in reference to reaching out to the community. I'm a hands-on outreach minister. I'll go up in the club, I'll go on the block, I'll go on the street, I'll go in a house that maybe some people wouldn't go into. That's the kind of work I've been doing, and I offer that to the Buffalo community. I'm originally from New York City, and I'm ready to go. Just let me know, and I will hold hands with you and make it happen. And put my clergy collar on and come into and help gather some folks that maybe normally wouldn't come to church or what have you. I'm here. I'm extended family. I love you, and let me know who I need to call, what I need to do, and we'll put it together. And a worship experience that I can offer also has bass in the speakers with the DJ, with hip hop dancers, poetry, or whatever, and they would come from your community. So I would have to get in touch with you to gather those folks in your community, but we can make it happen. And I'm very sure about that. I've been doing this for too many years, and you guys need it right now. And I'm willing to help in whatever way I can. Much love, much love. Thank you.
All
And
right.
thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Brother.
Thank you
Appreciate it.
so much. One other thing I just saw is that Apostle Ramos offered to have clergy from Harlem come and be present, and we want to duly note that as well. So at this time, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Taylor, Dr. Henry Taylor Jr., who will offer us, Henry Louis Taylor, excuse me, who is really a true expert in terms of development in East Buffalo as a professor at the University of Buffalo. And I'd like to pair his conversations with Reverend Gibson, who is the pastor at Calvary Baptist Church, which will speak specifically to the question of food deserts. Dr. Taylor.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. I'd like to kind of start my comments off by briefly talking about what residential segregation means in a city like Buffalo, and to try to understand what those dynamics are. Black Buffalo is not just a segregated community, but a segregated community that reflects the American system of apartheid. And it's important to understand that, because it allows us to begin to imagine the types of policies that have been developed and continue to be developed that leads to the segregation of African Americans. Racial residential segregation in this country stems from a residential land value system that is based on whiteness. And by that I mean to say, there's a tendency for us to over-exaggerate redlining while minimizing the specific types of issues that gave rise to redlining. And by this, I mean to say that when home ownership developed and the land valuation system that was designed to drive home ownership was based on whiteness. Simply put, it meant that as the percentage of whites and class exclusivity increased, so did the value of houses and residential land. As the percent of Blacks and class inclusivity increased, the value of residential land and housing went down. And so white wealth is based on Black exclusion. That's the way the system was designed. And it meant that we were isolated as a group on the most undesirable and inexpensive residential lands within the city. Within this system of isolation, the isolation itself creates predatory activities. So it's a mistake to think that the Black community is being disinvested. That's not what's going on. What we see occurring in the Black community is predatory forms of investment and predatory activities that oppress and exploit. A part of this system is that many of the kind of major institutions, grocery stores, department stores, doctors' offices, and the like, they locate elsewhere and try to create as much distance between themselves and the African American community as possible. This allows a range of predatory groupings to occur inside of the community. A principal site of this activity centers around housing. And one of the great and most significant problems that African Americans face is rent gouging and substandard housing. Now I make a distinction between rent gouging and affordability. Rent gouging is occurring when someone is paying 36% or more of their income on housing that is substandard and in many instances decaying. And the gap between that type of housing and the rents that are charged is what allows them to make huge profits. So in Buffalo, you have a number of instances where African-American people are paying 40, 50, 60, and I've seen some census tracts where they're paying as much as 70% of their income on housing. So these things result from that. And that's also why we use the term food apartheid rather than food desert. A desert makes it sound like it's a naturally occurring phenomena. It's a part of some kind of ecological system. Apartheid means that it's a reflection of policies and the issues that we face and that we confront. On this, in a little remaining times that I have, I want to talk a little bit about what I think are the key and essential problems that are facing African Americans within this racially segregated environment. And I want to emphasize that because one of the things that we see going on in Buffalo now is a lot of activities occurring around what I call symbolic projects. Projects that generate a lot of hope and possibilities, but that will not make a fundamental change in the life of the people who live in the neighborhoods and communities, because they're not attacking root causes. So if we want to change the trajectory of the African-American community and improve the lives of people living there, we must attack root problems. If we don't, we'll do a lot of things, but everything will remain the same. So one of the top problems that we face is one I mentioned before, rent gouging and substandard housing. This substandard housing issue centers around the housing that people are currently living in, the housing that people actually are residing in. And we think that these housing conditions are a primary source of what we call toxic stress that are producing a series of problems, both in health, but other problems and issues inside of the communities. I'll just highlight a few. Number one, it's just the high rents are responsible for people constantly moving. Buffalo has one of the highest eviction rate in New York City, in New York State, higher than New York City. And also it means that not only are you having people who are forced to move because of eviction, but you also have people who are moving to stay one step ahead of the landlord. That is a stress-provoking environment and situation. There are also people who are living in houses where they have issues of rats and roaches and other varmints. There's one woman who talked about having so many roaches that it interferes with food because you can't keep it, because they will invade and get into those kinds of things. So these things not only produce a series of health issues and health problems, but that toxic stress forces people to move. And when people are constantly moving, that's going to impact things like education. So for example, many of these kids don't have some dedicated place in the house to study and to read. Many of the kids that are constantly moving, that means they're constantly in the process of shifting and changing schools. In a lot of these old houses in Buffalo, they're cold in the winter and warm in the summer, hot in the summer, because of what we call the heat island effect, which means that when it's hot everywhere else, it's much hotter in these neighborhoods and communities. And that kind of list goes on. But as significant as this problem is, almost nobody's working on it. Almost nobody's working on it. And those who say they're working on it focus on new builds, not the houses that people exist in, but say we'll attack these issues by creating new houses. No, you won't. You can try, but you will surely fail. You can't build your way out of this problem. We have to find a way to attack these existing issues and questions. A second issue that I want to mention in these neighborhoods and communities is a lack of a green infrastructure. In the city of Buffalo, you've got the way the roadway system is situated and constructed. You've got thousands of automobiles that are moving back and forward through these neighborhoods and communities. Without trees and other green elements, there's no protection against the air pollution and the noise pollution. And as a consequence, on Buffalo's east side, we have a serious issue with a range of respiratory diseases, including asthma. The next to the final issue I want to make that's emerging as a huge barrier to development is the commodification of vacant residential lands. The city of Buffalo has embarked on a process of selling these vacant lands to the highest bidder. And in areas, certain areas of the African-American community, this thing is already out of control. In the Fruit Belt, for example, a section of Buffalo, which is next to the medical campus and a community in danger of gentrification, St. John Baptist Church paid $200,000 for 4 vacant lots that have an assessed value of $16,000. And to put it in perspective, most of the houses in the Fruit Belt don't cost $200,000. And all over Buffalo's east side,
No.
I really think it's the plumbing.
you're finding lots selling for $100,000, $35,000. On Jefferson Avenue, there's a lot over there selling for $35,000.
Speaker is muted.
Denise, can you?
Makes it
Okay.
extremely difficult to pull together the types of resources that you need in order to develop the neighborhoods and community. The last thing I want to mention is what we call is this existing process of development on the east side. Because in Buffalo, we don't have on-the-job training programs. We don't have on-the-job training programs. All of the big projects that are being planned and are coming off the line. There are about 6 projects, for example, that they say will be worth around $200 million. We project that about 90 to 95% of this $200 million will go to whites, the owners of businesses and the workers who do the development of the projects. The point I'm making is, under the current pattern, the development of the East Side will become a big jobs program for the white community. All African Americans will get a building, but the wealth that it took to produce the building will go into the white community. Our community has become like a sieve with water running through it, leaving nothing but a residue. So in the absence of that, we are missing a golden opportunity. With an on-the-job training program, Blacks would be put in a position to rebuild their lives as they rebuild their neighborhoods. And I'm going to stop for there so that Pastor Gibson will have time to make his remarks.
Thank you so very kindly. Thank you so very kindly, Dr. Taylor, and to Pastor Peter, and to all of those who make up this call. I do want to, again, thank you, Dr. Taylor, for setting up what I have to share as it relates to really unearthing some of the terminology that's being thrown around within our community. Because we truly cannot begin to affect any type of change unless we get to the root of those issues that truly exist. And so even as Dr. Taylor shared many of those statistics and much of the information that he shared today, it may make some uncomfortable, but I believe that that is what this traumatic event, this tragic event, should have caused all of us to really become aware of, that these issues that we're talking about, these issues that we need to address, are not issues that are new. to the east side of Buffalo, that these issues are not issues that are new, nor are they foreign to us as a nation, but they really have deep-seated issues that have yet to be addressed. I also want to thank Pastor Cook, Julian Cook, as well as Reverend Denise for their intentional use of the word food apartheid. I'm grateful for that intentional use, because during this time, more than ever, our terminology is key. Our terminology is fundamentally important if we look to, again, address what's really going on. And the issue that is taking place is not the fact that a grocery store within a Black community was simply compromised by one who planned out thoughtfully this attack and who drove a great distance to ensure that this attack was carried out. But the notion of food apartheid is very critical, that we cannot continue to now say that a food desert is what exists. And this notion of a food apartheid is something that is not new. It is not foreign. It is a term that was actually coined by one of our sisters engaged in the fight, Sister Karen Washington, a Bronx native, an urban farmer, an advocate of food justice, a therapist, a community leader, who coined this very important term to help us to understand that we who have a vested interest in seeing change to this insecurity that's plaguing our urban context, that we can't continue to, again, use this cookie cutter definition, but that we have to understand that it involves so much more than just limited access to food. All right. As she put it in one of her interviews, that this phrase, food desert, that it means nothing because, number one, people in the hood, people where we live, people where we pastor, we don't use that term, but it truly is an outside term that really, when you start to think of this notion of a desert, you think of an empty place. You think of a place with little life or no life at all. An absolute desolate place. But when talking about our urban context and our urban communities, there is much life. There is truly vibrancy and potential that exists. And so instead of using that term, again, she coined this phrase, food apartheid, because food apartheid looks at the whole food system. Much of what even Dr. Taylor even focused in on. It focuses on race, it focuses on geography, it focuses on faith, it focuses on economics. And when you say apartheid, you get to the root of some of the problems in and around food systems. It brings in hunger, it brings in this notion of poverty, it brings us to the more important question of what are some of the social inequities and inequalities that we see that, again, we are facing here. And so again, through this notion of using this term of food apartheid, it helps us to move to this notion of food sovereignty, which is being co-opted in the same way that food justice is, because food sovereignty is a term that was founded by indigenous people in Central and South America, where they were fighting for governance. Food sovereignty is now being interchanged with food justice. And although they are coexisting conditions, they're two terms with substantial differences, that even those terms have been watered down. But food desert, it sugarcoats what the problems are that really exist. And if we're going to bring a supermarket in, we have to understand that that's not going to simply change the problem. But when we talk about food apartheid, that it simply helps us to have real conversation to begin. And so I say this because all of this, even our gathering here today, is to help us to rewrite the narrative that has unfortunately been written in a wrong manner. That my colleagues and I, who are right here in the city of Buffalo, right here engaged in the fight for change, my colleagues who are right here on the ground, who are looking to see to it that again, long-term impact is made, that we are here to rewrite the narrative, that we're here to ensure that there are options and access that are given right here on the east side of Buffalo. That is why we are gathered here today, to talk about, again, what these resources are that are available to us, so that individuals know not only what those options are, but that individuals understand that they too have access. For far too long, the narrative has been written that companies and businesses and infrastructure couldn't take place here on the east side of Buffalo because of the amount of violence that takes place. Well, again, when we really began to pull the veil off of what took place on May 14th, we will see that it was not us who caused this traumatic and tragic event to take place, but it was one who came from the outside. It's also been stated in false narratives that there are a lack of dollars, particularly a lack of Black dollars that exist here within the east side of Buffalo, that prevent us from having establishments and from having an assortment of grocery stores and other things at our disposal. Well, I'm here today to report that the Black dollar is alive and well here on the east side of Buffalo. And not only is the Black dollar alive and well, but when we begin to create infrastructures that produce jobs, then guess what? Along with those jobs, along with employment, creates a system of wealth that can continue to circulate right here within our backyard. It's also been stated that there is a little room here on the east side of Buffalo, but you've already heard from Dr. Taylor that we have the lots, we have the properties that are available. And so it's important that we stop monopolizing how these lots are being acquired, that we stop looking to give those lots out to simply the highest bidder, and we start to come together so that we are able to produce things right here on the east side of Buffalo that will help the entire community, that we will help to combat the low access that we have, not only from just any type of food, but also fresh produce and other things of that nature. Because the truth of the matter is that not everyone enjoys the luxury of being able to go outside of a 1 mile radius for their shopping needs. But when we have those type of systems set up right here within the east side of Buffalo, then we can not only make sure that those issues are addressed, but we can ensure that Black-owned businesses are able to be a part of this rebuilding, and that big businesses see that their dollars, that there are dollars right here that are being generated here within this east side. And so some of the ways in which we have here at Even Calvary have started to really aid in this process is we've really just been a part of observing and taking a needs assessment. We were already a part of the group of churches that were occupying food pantries on a weekly basis, something that we continue to even do throughout the pandemic. But we have been in conversation, have been having conversation with Feed More and other entities that we work with to see how we can even not only serve as a way and means to increase our food distribution, but more importantly, have a central and trusted figure whereby people can come and people can gain access to those resources that are available. I'm even prayerful that as we have been able to come together today through the wonderful coordination of the National Council of Churches, that we're able to create a database whereby when individuals come for food distribution, that they not only receive a bag of groceries, but they also receive a bag of resources that are available for their health, for their mental health services, for not only their health and their wellness, but to also ensure that this healing process is going forth as well, to ensure that even as there are services that perhaps are being duplicated throughout our city, that they know exactly where their nearest service providers are for them to take place. I've also been blessed to work with a number of my colleagues here on the line as we look to, again, create options. And again, we're not just looking for options that, again, individuals deem as options that are affordable, but we're looking to create such an impact that jobs are being produced as a result of meeting the needs that come along with what has taken place at this grocery store. And so as I conclude even my comments today, we seek all of your support throughout our state, throughout our, again, nation. We seek your support in helping us to move forward with having petitions signed as we look to create infrastructure right here on the east side of Buffalo. It's already been stated that we can't wait to November, but even this month on the 28th, making sure that we're pushing individuals to the polls so that we have individuals who will speak on not only the behalf of the east side of Buffalo, but places that resemble the east side of Buffalo right here in the state of New York, right here within our nation, that will even serve as voices that will be heard even in Washington. And again, we're looking for a commitment, a continued commitment, not only to help us a little over a month after this travesty has occurred, but we're looking for a commitment to help us 6 months down the road, a year down the road, 2 and 3 years down the road, as we know that this process of rebuilding is one that will take place for years to come.
Great. Thank you, Pastor Gibson. So we're going to allow for a solid 10 minutes for questions. I want to, so forgive us if we're running over a little on our time, but it's important that we hear from folks. I do want to say that, this is recorded. We're going to try to send out a report, out of this conversation with some leads in terms of networking, in terms of next steps. And that will, come out of this conversation. And we also mentioned that we might be working to create a database. We might be doing that with a group like LISC, who might be able to offer some apparatus so that this information can be organized. So in that spirit, I'd like to ask, I have 2 people who have questions. Please be brief in your questions, and we'll open it up to the panelists. So Ronnie Minter, would you be willing to ask a question here?
You know what, Reverend Cook, I really don't have a question at this time. I'm discouraged and I'm hurting because I don't see. Please understand that I know this conversation about food insecurities and housing insecurities there is so important in many Black communities across this nation. I believe that wholeheartedly. I sit on a lot of those conversations. I do a lot of work around housing insecurities. However, at this point, at this time, my mind is focused on how to stop us from getting murdered. Okay, that's all I want to hear about. That's what I thought this conversation was going to be centered on, because there's a lot of us who are tired, me being one of them, me who feeling like I can't go to the grand opening of a new market in Albany because it's in a predominantly Black community, me feeling like I'm not going to a Juneteenth event because it's going to be predominantly Black people there. This incident in Buffalo has impacted me in such a way that I can't even describe anymore, right? And I've always been not fearful, but aware of my surroundings because of what this nation presents to Black people. But after Buffalo, I'm like, what the heck? And then I listened to you all and I talked to my pastor. I'm born and raised in the AME Zion Church. I am AME Zion to the core of me, but I am struggling. I am struggling hard body because where is God in all of this? How much are we supposed to take from these people? How much? I got a 13-year-old granddaughter that I'm scared to death for her to be sitting outside or anything. And I don't want to keep her in a bubble, but what do I do? What do I do? I take her shopping where there's more white people. Why do I have to feel like that?
Mhm.
And what we're doing right now is not addressing how to keep your residents safe from somebody entering their community and killing them. What do you do with that?
Mhm.
Giving out a bag of food isn't going to keep them from getting murdered.
So
Yeah, let me speak to
thank you,
that.
Ronnie. If somebody would
Yeah,
care to
I'll
respond.
speak to that. I mean, we have to keep this thing in perspective. I understand all of the feelings and emotions, but this shooting in Buffalo is tied to the Republican Party, Donald Trump, and the right wing. This shooting in Buffalo is tied to the anti-race, critical race theory movement and voter suppression all over the United States. They targeted a food store because they want to frighten Black people of these places. Think about it, the idea, the timing of this. We're right in the middle of the election season. They want people afraid to go vote. This is about terrorism. It's about terrorism. It's about making us fearful. And if we don't vote, understand, we minimize the danger of the right. They are this close to taking over this country.
Sir, I disagree with you.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
a
saying that.
hardcore voter. I'm a hardcore voter. But Donald Trump wasn't in office when Dylan Roof ran up in
No, what I'm saying is that terrorism and the Black community, because we represent the most progressive force in this country, always have. And because of that, we have always been the targets of terrorism. I mean, and the terrorism that we can't even imagine today. I had a cousin who was murdered by a white guy because the white guy was going with this girl, with a girl he liked. In the South, lynching was just something that it could occur anywhere. So terrorism is what it is, and it is designed to control us. Right now, there is a political agenda tied to this. And that political agenda is that. Now, historically, and I suspect in the present, African-American will develop these mechanisms. Once upon a time in the South, it was the Deacons of Defense. In our most recent time, it was the Black Liberation Army and other groups that are designed to do that. But at the same time, these issues of food insecurity, these issues of housing, they are killing people. This isn't just a matter, they are killing people. And so how do we respond? I think we respond, one, by making sure that we vote. And I think number two, we respond by accelerating the battle and the fight against those elements that oppress, exploit, and kill us. The food, the housing, the neighborhoods, and don't forget the police.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I realize that this conversation is a multi-layered conversation and that it affects people in different ways. And we want to be sure that, people have their voice in the middle of this. And I really do appreciate very much this exchange between Ronnie, who asked some really powerful questions and concerns, and Dr. Taylor, thank you. I have Eddie Igrio, if you have a question. Eddie, you're on mute.
How about now?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
I'd like to echo some of the things that Dr. Taylor said, because from the beginning to the end, everything he said was accurate, and it still is. But I think the best way to solve what we have been addressing is the killings. Of course, we have this racism issue, but we also have problems within our city. Dr. Taylor brought up one issue, on-the-job training. I've had a lot of experience with taking kids off the streets with on-the-job training with pay, because without pay, these kids will never leave those streets. And the quality of life has been forgotten about in the East Side forever, since I've been here since '83. I think if we address and create these jobs and take these kids off the corners and open the doors, especially the unions with that demand of high school diploma, I am totally against them demanding for somebody being able to swing a hammer or spread cement or do some bricklaying. And they put this burden on these minority communities where majority of them have not graduated or do not even have a GED. So the quality of life and crime reduction and this killing will have to be addressed strictly by creating new openings for the community itself. This racism issue does come from history. It still exists, and communities have been intentionally made the way they are, where you got South Buffalo, you got the East Side, and you got the diversity on the West Side. It's almost like planned many, many years ago, and they don't want to change that plan. I've lived in the East Side since '89. I have seen the worst of the
Muted, Eddie.
You're muted, Eddie.
Yeah, the things that I see neglected the most is the opportunities that everybody else has that these kids or the minorities, the blacks, do not have. But they do have the qualifications. The banks have been neglecting them in the past, and they still are. I had a homes on the East Side, deep in the East Side. I couldn't get a loan from the bank. As soon as I moved over there to another location, I was able to snap my fingers and get a loan. So the banks are another big issue. If anybody could address to what I had to say, if they think any different, please do so. And that's all I have to say.
Okay. Would one of our panelists like to respond?
Peter,
Yes.
I know I have already shared, but my heart is really going out to Ronnie, who is sharing pain right now. And I think it is, it's a heavy pain, it's a heavy fear. And we have to admit that the intimidation is working. And fear is working. Fear is a big business in America. And the news every week, every night, every day, every morning, the news is about what you need to be afraid of. And you have to buy this product or have this service because of fear. And all of these things are challenging to our faith, whatever your faith tradition is, it challenges our faith. And yes, it's one blow after another. And this is the moment where we have to reach through our pain to hold on to our belief system that continues to bring us forward in spite of. And yes, there are moments where we sit just like Job. And the pain, I look up and everything I had is gone. And there's only one witness to come back and testify, and I alone survived to be able to tell the story. And so we are the survivors who have to tell the story. We are the ones to have to tell the story. And so a creative and innovative support system now is ripe to be constructed, so that before Ronnie calls out and says, I can't take this anymore, there are those who are sensitive to the moment and say, I'll come and sit with you. I'll sit on the front steps with you. I'll sit on the front porch with you. You want to go to the celebration this weekend, will go. Several of us will go with you. We will search through our toolkit of spiritual disciplines to be able to support one another. One thing is very, very clear, very, very clear, is that in something like this, because stuff existed before this happened and stuff exists after this happened, that we have to take care of each other. That Buffalo takes care of each other. And we who are standing with you and praying with you and for you are a part of that, want to be a part of that support group as it emerges. There needs to be more than one coffee and conversation in one place. It needs to be in others so that wherever you live, you can come. I shared with a group before that I know growing up in my faith tradition as a child, we thought testimony time was funny. People would come, if those of you that like testimony, they say the same testimony every time without understanding that that is the way of releasing whatever pain, whatever happened, whatever in that moment, and be able to testify that all this happened, but God brought me through. And so coffee and conversation and testimony may need to be revived in a 21st century way so that we're able to express our pain and find the healing, which I love what Dr. Taylor says. Thank you for helping me to heal. And healing happens in connection, in community. We must be in position to help each other heal.
All right. Thank you. We are past our time. I will invite, I have one other hand up here. Reverend Clark, briefly, did you want to ask a question or say something?
Yes, I just wanted to say to Ronnie that thank you for again sharing what is pain and reminding us what the most important issue is that has to be tackled. And I want to say what I heard from you is you saying, listen, everybody, we just want to live. We just want to live. And I think that's, if we can focus on the fact that people just want to live and find ways to help that to be a more objective approach, and it is multi-level, as I'll say with Reverend Peter Cook. It is multi-level, but I believe we've got to, clergy has to come together, help the community come together, and it can be done, and it can be done. But there's one thing I want to share with you, Ronnie, and please feel free to reach out to me. I want to reach out with you. I want to come to Buffalo. I want to break bread with you, all right? Because I don't want my sister feeling as much fear as you're feeling, and anything I could do about it, I want to be a part of it. But we've got to bring folks. Neighbors got to help neighbors. Okay, we've got to. It's time to come back to community, to the village. I remember when I was on the streets of New York, I could be outside downstairs with my mother on the 5th floor, looking out her window whenever she chose to do so, but she didn't have to stay in that window. And I was okay downstairs shooting skelly on the street with my friends. Okay, if I wanted something, I would yell up and say, "Ma, throw down some money, it's the ice cream man." We've lost that, and we got to get that back. But that comes with people coming together, having these important conversations. That comes with people loving each other enough to say, you know what? When I look at you, I see my sister, I see my brother, I see another human being. Okay, and those are the messages. Somebody said, "Oh, we don't need mentors. We don't need this. We don't." No, we do need mentors. We do need leadership. When I was growing up, I could look up to Dr. King. I could look up to, Thurgood Marshall. I could look up to Coretta Scott King and all these people. These folks do not exist in droves right now in the media spectrum. but they do exist in our community, and we need to shine the light on those folks. We need to raise the level of good going on in our community, of the good people that are working in the community, because right now what's so loud is the negativity. What's so loud is the death, and we need to raise the level of the life in our community. We need to raise the level of the positive people in our community and those trying to do good, and that's what's not happening in the media, in the news media. They don't show up to a lot of the events where there's positive action going on in the community. So we've got to change that. We've got to be involved in politics. We've got to be involved in voting. We cannot not show up. The last thing we do to hurt ourselves is to not show up in this political era and whatnot. And we must not be fear. I'm not scared of nobody. I don't care who it is. I had my father put a double-barrel shotgun to my head, and my mother tried to stab me with a turkey carving knife. Trust me, I don't fear any man. All right, and I know that God is greater than the evil that abounds us right now. We got work to do. All we got to do is connect up, link up, and make it happen. And the devil is a liar. In Jesus' name, we will rise above this, and this will help us come together as a people, as a community, as a country, as a state. I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that feels like a closing call to action to me. So I want to thank everyone for participating in this really an opening conversation. And we will be sending a follow-up, including this video, to all of you and identifying kind of next steps in terms of how we can be present to one another and work forward. You know, we talked about the interpersonal and structural dimensions of racism. And those are two things which are held together. And we have to attend to both of them, not turn this into a kind of a head game of looking at structures and ignoring the personal, but at the same time divorcing the personal from these questions around structure. Both are important and are held in tension as we move forward. So I want to thank everyone for participating today. We will follow up, and we'll try to find another place for us to land for another conversation going forward. I want to really invite everyone to connect with one another, to try to be present and to listen well and to be open to collaboration in your community as we address this multi-level struggle that we are facing right now in East Buffalo and indeed across the country. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.